In today's episode, a 59-year-old doctor became the victim to one of the most intriguing grizzly encounters ever recorded. He tragically died, but in a way that nobody ever expected. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is the terrifying bear attack on Dr. David Lertzman. Welcome to Final Affliction. The Werris Creek Trail System is a network of biking and hiking paths that wind through the boreal forest. It is surrounded by towering trees and offers breathtaking vistas of the infamous Canadian Rocky Mountains. As you make your way along the trails, you'll see a diverse array of wildlife including bison, elk, exotic birds, deer, and black and grizzly bears. If lucky enough, one can spot trout fish jumping to catch low-flying insects on the Ghost River, which joins the Bow River at the Ghost Lake. The trails also offer a strenuous, challenging workout through the rocky terrain and steep inclines. However, no matter how difficult the hiking or biking is, the views are always worth it. It is a must-visit destination for anyone seeking adventure and a connection with Mother Nature. Dr. David Lertzman was a 59-year-old senior instructor at the University of Calgary. He was an assistant professor of sustainable development and environmental management at the university's Haskayne School of Business. He had a passion for the environment and organized week-long wilderness retreat courses in Kananaskis, where students would be taught how to use their senses in navigation and also meditation to find their places in the environment. He and his wife Sarah Lertzman lived near Werris Creek, northwest of Calgary. Their home's location provided unlimited access to the hiking trail system near Ghost River, where David would trail run twice a day as he sought his deep connection with nature. On Tuesday, 4th of May 2021, the clocks were ticking at 6 p.m. when Dr. David left home for his second run of the day. He chose the Moss Trail as his preferred path as it wound its way through towering cliffs, ascending higher and higher into the hill. He relished the challenge ahead, and his feet pounded the ground as he stepped into the trail. He let his eyes adjust to the dimming light because the day was drawing to a close. He took a moment and soaked in the beauty of his surroundings. He felt the wind carrying the sounds of the night whip past him and instantly invigorate his senses. From the nearby chirping of crickets to the distant bellows of bison, the woods were about to come to life. He saw a high embankment along the trail where he paused to catch his breath. He stood close to its edge and decided to enjoy the breathtaking views from the top of the embankment. He stood still as he let his eyes wander until they fell on something interesting. Far below, he could see the twinkling lights of the town, a reminder of the never-sleeping world he had left behind. Up there, he felt 1,000,000 miles away, as though on top of the world, surrounded by the stillness and beauty of nature. He had never felt so alive and so connected to the wilderness around him as he did at that very moment. He was lost in thought, soaking up the peace and quiet of the wild. However, unbeknown to him, a female grizzly bear and her cub were feeding nearby and had heard him approach the embankment. Without warning, the sow grizzly appeared from the underbrush and silently sneaked up behind him. With his eyes gazing at the distant sea of lights, Dr. David was so absorbed in the view that he didn't notice that a grizzly was fast approaching until it was too late. Back at home, Sarah was beginning to fill with a sense of urgency and fear. It was almost 10 p.m., and her husband was long overdue from his run. Her husband would always return home after an hour or two in the woods, but it was now 4 hours since he left, and there was still no sign of him. Knowing the trail her husband normally took, she grabbed her coat and bravely set out, hoping that David was only injured or lost and unable to come back to the trail. She knew that being out in the wild by herself was unsafe, but for the love of her husband, she was willing to face her fears. With her torch as the only source of light in the darkness, she hiked on the rugged Moss Trail as her heart pounded away in her chest. The path was rocky and steep, and she found herself stumbling more than once, but she was not one to give up easily. She pressed on, her torch beam cast eerie shadows on the bushes, rocks, and trees around her, with the sounds of the night echoing in the air, constantly scaring her. She had never felt so alone and so far from the safety of her home. She searched and searched, but David was nowhere to be seen. As the night wore on, her feet were growing weary. Exhaustion kicked in, and she was slowly giving up. She decided it was time to notify the authorities. Just before midnight, she called Cochrane Royal Canadian Mounted Police and notified them of her missing husband. The authorities then launched a search, and a team consisting of a helicopter with a spotlight and police dogs were dispatched. For the next 2 hours, the search party combed the rugged terrain as they retraced David's steps. Just after 2 a.m. Wednesday, the search crew found David's lifeless body, crumpled off Moss Trail near Ghost River. The rescue team immediately transported his body to the coroner for medical examination. The officers closed the trail system as investigations into the incident were launched. An autopsy on Dr. David's body revealed the most puzzling and intriguing grizzly encounters ever recorded. The grizzly had attacked from behind and pushed David off the 900-foot cliff. David had then tumbled down to the bottom of the cliff near Ghost River. His wounds were consistent with an instantaneous death being his fate. Track evidence on the hiking trail showed that a single female grizzly that was accompanied by her cub was involved in the attack. The authorities discerned that it was not a predatory attack and that the cub was not involved. Sarah was deeply devastated by her husband's demise, given that she had stood at the exact spot of the attack while searching for him and didn't detect any signs of the attack. She had stood on the cliff above her husband without knowing. After all, she was looking for a man in distress and not for a scene of something bad that had happened. However, the authorities cautioned her against going back to the hiking trails, as she also could have suffered the same fate if the bear had seen her. As reality set in, a deep cloud of sadness engulfed her as she replayed their moments together in her mind. Her cries turned to whimpers, and for the longest time, she was inconsolable. The grief was like a shard in her gut that wouldn't just go away. However, she hoped that with time, the edges would dull. Bears come out of their dens in spring, making it a dangerous period to be in the wild. This is because they are usually hungry and wandering to where they had their last meal before the winter came. This was suspected by the Canmore Fish and Wildlife officers to be the fueling factors of the bear's behavior. Following the attack, the officers set baited traps in a bid to capture the bear and understand why this dreadful attack had happened. Unfortunately, 3 weeks after the grim attack, there was still no bear activity detected in the area. The officers concluded that the sow and her cub were no longer in the area of the attack and removed the traps to mitigate the risk of inadvertently attracting other predators to the trails. They then scaled back their investigation and reopened the trail system to the public after marking it safe to use. The local community at large was saddened by the horrific turn of events and held a memorial in remembrance of Dr. David Lertzman. The University of Calgary's dean, Dr. Jim DeWald, eulogized David as a friend to all and a spiritual leader committed to their Indigenous connections. He also added that Dr. David had a profound impact on thousands of students and colleagues. Over the years, he had noted that many of the students Dr. David had taught would come back to him and tell him how his course had changed their lives for the better. The University of Calgary's flag was lowered on May 6th in honor of his service to the community. The authorities reminded people in the backcountry of the need to use marked paths and trails, watch for fresh signs of bear activity, make noise, and always carry bear spray and know how to use it while out in the woods. Failure to do so may result in your untimely final affliction.